officials ramp up efforts to place sanctions on Russia. American military troops have been arriving there to take on support roles, and that's throughout Europe. For insight into what this means for the U.S. and its allies, we're joined by retired Marine Colonel Mark Cancian, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, in the past 24 hours, so much has changed and developed with this situation. We know U.S. troops are there, but not for combat, we've been told. It's been primarily for humanitarian efforts. Would this change in light of what we've heard over the past 12 hours?
No. The U.S. government, the president have been emphatic that our forces in Eastern Europe are there to support our Eastern European allies and to signal to the Russians U.S. resolve. But the main reason is for support of our Eastern European allies. They are terrified about what is happening in the East. There's a long history of Russian invasion and interference in their affairs, and they want reassurance that in a crisis, the United States and NATO would support them. So the United States has sent about 6,000 troops into Eastern Europe. They're doing exercises and support with our allies there, but they are not preparing for combat against Russia.
You know, it's interesting because there's this intensity and yet a waiting game. We have been following reports that U.S. officials are discussing precautionary plans to assist the Ukrainian government with moving President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, out of Kiev if Putin does decide to invade. What would this strategy look like, especially if they believe that Zelensky's safety is at risk?
I think the United States is probably planning to increase its support for Ukraine, maybe ship more weapons, which we've been doing and increasing, and that would help, of course, the Ukrainian military. I think that any action with the Ukrainian president has to be done very carefully. We have to remember that with Afghanistan, when the president left the capital, the country and military collapsed. So I think that would be something done only in the most extreme circumstances. And when you look at what the Russians might be capable of doing, it's unlikely that they could take the entire country. Kiev crosses the Dnipro River, and it's, I think, highly likely that even in the most extreme circumstances, they would be able to hold out on the western bank.
But this is certainly, when you mentioned Afghanistan, it was like you read my mind because of what went down there. And this is a totally different situation in so many ways, and yet very fresh in Americans' memory as to how President Biden and this administration have handled matters of foreign policy and again, tense foreign matters. But what role does NATO play in this situation? Do you anticipate that other neighboring European countries will actually step up and offer their own military support since U.S. combat forces will not be involved here?
I think other NATO countries will be following the U.S. lead. A few of them have sent forces into Eastern Europe, the UK, for example, and some of them have sent forces into the Baltic countries, which aren't threatened in this particular crisis, but are very exposed and have been very worried about Russian intentions. Several European countries have also sent weapons and aid to the Ukrainians, as the United States has, and I think you'll see that continuing. But they are not going to take any combat role. They are even less likely than the United States. There's no support for that in Europe. The German action is actually quite significant on Nord Stream 2. They had been hesitant before. They're desperately dependent on Russian gas, so this is a major step for them.
Yes, a major step, quite a message being sent to Putin with that decision from Germany. Thank you so much, Colonel, for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to click on the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.